The poem that we're looking at today is Charge of the Light Brigade by Alfred Tennyson. And the three sections of our lesson are: what is Tennyson saying about the soldier's sacrifice? How does Tennyson present his argument on the soldier's sacrifice? And then why is Tennyson concerned with the soldier's sacrifice? If you have a look at these two pictures or paintings, I want you to think about what words best describe the paintings and what big ideas are explored in the paintings. You might have a look at these pictures and see that these are soldiers on horses. They're called cavalry. And you might think that there's some violence in these paintings because they're holding swords, and I can see death here of this soldier. I can also see, if I look closely, that there are some horses and other soldiers in the background who seem to be dying. These soldiers here, they look quite brave and really heroic as they charge together. It looks to me like these paintings are depicting an event which happened a while ago because of the uniforms that the soldiers are wearing and the fact that they're on horses. So these two paintings depict the Charge of the Light Brigade, which is what Alfred Tennyson, what his poem is about. And actually these two pictures are from a battle called the Crimean War. And that was fought between 1853 and 1856. Alfred Tennyson read about this particular battle in the Times newspaper, and he was really proud of the British soldiers for fighting in the brave way that they did. But he was also horrified because out of the 600 soldiers that fought in this war, he read that only 100 returned. The battle was really costly. Lots of soldiers died. And actually, many people think that the battle happened as a mistake or a blunder that one of the commanders gave. The soldiers should never have fought in the battle. It was a suicidal mission because they were surrounded on all sides by the Russian cannons, which meant that really they were riding in this picture towards their death. It was just luck, those soldiers that survived, but many of them died. So we're now going to read the poem, and I'm going to ask you to pause the video now and read the poem and think about what 5 big ideas do you think are explored in Tennyson's poem. So hopefully you've read the poem now, and you might be starting to think about some of the big ideas or themes that Tennyson is exploring. So like we've seen in the pictures, there's death in this poem. We see death in the valley of death. And we know that these soldiers were dying, theirs but to do and die. We also get a sense that these soldiers are really brave. So it speaks about how they are the noble 600, that means brave. And it says, boldly they rode. We can see this idea of violence in the poem. There's cannons repeated here, the anaphora of cannons, and also these sabres, which means swords, which are flashing at the cavalry. Another big idea in this poem is that someone had blundered, someone had made a mistake. And even though here the someone is anonymous, we know, and the people reading this poem would have known, the commander who made the mistake, who was the reason that those honourable Light Brigade, many of them died. In addition to this, though, we have the big idea of patriotism. So these soldiers, they're fighting for their country. We don't get to hear about the individual names of the soldiers, but we do know that this brave Light Brigade rode and died to fight for their country. So on the surface, we can see then that this poem is a celebration of the Victorian drive to expand their empire. Tennyson had to appear to be in support of the king and queen because he'd recently been given the position of the poet laureate. So he was given a position by royalty, and that meant that he had to seem like he was supporting them. But under the surface, we can also see Tennyson as criticising those that blundered and questioning why so many soldiers had to die in this foreign war. Some of you might have noticed one of the techniques that Tennyson uses, which is the rhythm throughout the poem. Tennyson uses this rhythm to help us to understand the inevitability of the soldiers' deaths. So there are 6 syllables in every line, with the first and the middle syllable stressed. Forward the light brigade, half a league, half a league. And just as the rhythm never falters, neither do the soldiers, as they ride heroically, boldly, nobly towards the cannons that surround them. Let's have a look now at some of the other ways that Tennyson helps to convey his message. One thing that I find really interesting is this line, into the valley of death. So the valley of death comes from the Bible, and Tennyson's audience would have known this quotation from the Bible. So one interpretation is that Tennyson is saying that the soldiers had God with them. Maybe then he's saying that the soldiers had to die and that they patriotically died with God at their side, who's welcoming them in heaven. The valley of death could also, though, be a reminder of how difficult and suicidal this battle was. Because as these soldiers rode, they were surrounded on all sides by cannons. It was quite literally a valley where you would likely end up in death. It's also interesting that Tennyson has used anaphora here. Cannon to right of them, cannon to left of them, cannon in front of them. And I find it really interesting how he doesn't say to the right of them, because there's not just one cannon to the right of them. Cannons are all the way to the right of them. It really emphasizes how they're surrounded. I also like the sounds here, stormed at with shot and shell. I think as well as the galloping, we can really hear the cannonballs as they're whizzing past, as well as the sand that's being churned up by the horses as they ride really quickly, lots of them to their deaths. Another part that I find really interesting, and this is the last line that we'll look at, is someone had blundered. Now remember those 2 big ideas, the fact that Tennyson was celebrating, but also under the surface, because he had to do it subtly, he was criticising. I think if we look at this line, someone had blundered, I think we can see that Tennyson is emphasising this word blundered. So blundered should, in the rhyme scheme, rhyme with 100. But it's a half rhyme, blundered, 100. It's almost like that word itself is a blunder. He's emphasising the blunder there. I think that Tennyson wanted us to see this as a blunder. He couldn't be obvious about it, but I think that he saw it as a blunder. And he's questioning why the noble 600 died. The last thing I'll leave you on is his decision to emphasise the word left. So he says, to right, cannon to left. And then again, all that was left of 600. Why does he choose to repeat 3 times the word left? I think it's because left is the opposite of right, and he doesn't think that what these soldiers had to do was right. So, why is Tennyson concerned with the soldier's sacrifice? I think that Tennyson is really concerned with the soldier's sacrifice. He wants to highlight their bravery and also criticize those in command who made them ride, unnecessarily perhaps, to their deaths.